I remember standing in a quiet room, the kind where the silence feels heavy enough to press against your chest. Everything I thought was permanent had slipped away like sand through my fingers. It's strange how the life you build so carefully can shift in just a moment, leaving you with nothing but the echoes of what used to be. In those first days, I couldn't see beyond the pain. It felt like the ending of everything, like the world had conspired to strip away not just the relationship, but the future I had once imagined. Yet as I stood in the middle of that emptiness, I began to notice something. When life takes away what you thought you couldn't live without, it also leaves you with something you didn't realize you needed: space to breathe, space to think, space to ask yourself questions you've avoided for years. For me, it was the space to wonder, who am I now, and who do I want to become? In the beginning, I didn't know the answers. I only knew that I had a choice. Either stay buried under the weight of the past, or start picking up the pieces, even if I wasn't sure where they would fit. And so, slowly, I started, not with grand gestures, but with small, almost invisible acts. I opened the curtains in the morning, even when I wanted to hide in the dark. I went for walks without a destination. I made coffee for myself, not because I needed it, but because it was a reminder that I still deserved to care for me. Over time, I began to rebuild. Not the same life I had before. No, that life was gone, and truthfully, I didn't want it back. I wanted something that was mine, something that reflected who I was now. I began learning new skills, some practical, some purely for joy. I started saying yes to opportunities I would have once ignored. It was as if I had been holding my breath for years and had finally learned how to inhale again. Freedom, I discovered, doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as an empty weekend or a calendar with no plans. In those quiet moments, I realized I was no longer living in someone else's shadow. My decisions were my own, my time belonged entirely to me, and my future was an open canvas. The past didn't vanish, and the scars didn't disappear. But scars have a way of becoming a map, reminders of where we've been, and proof of what we've survived. Those broken beginnings, the ones I thought would destroy me, became the very foundation of my new life. And this new life, though still uncertain, was rooted in strength I didn't know I had. I learned that freedom isn't just about walking away from something. It's about walking towards something better, even if you can't see it yet. It's about trusting that the road ahead, though unfamiliar, can hold more beauty than the one behind you. And it's about embracing the idea that endings, no matter how painful, can be the quiet beginnings of something extraordinary. Sometimes you don't rebuild your life by putting the old pieces back together. You start fresh. You find new pieces, new colors, new shapes, and you create something you've never seen before. That's what I did, and in the process, I didn't just rebuild a life. I built a freedom I never imagined I could have. And standing here now, I can tell you with certainty, broken beginnings can be the most beautiful starting points. It's strange how loss can feel like the end of a road, when in reality, it can be the quiet turning point towards something entirely new. In the beginning, it's almost impossible to see it that way. All you notice is the absence of the life you knew, the people you shared it with, and the certainty you once leaned on. It feels like a door has slammed shut, leaving you in the dark. But over time, I realized that sometimes when one door closes, a hallway of unexpected possibilities quietly appears. At first, I didn't go looking for those possibilities. I was too focused on just getting through the day, too busy trying to make sense of how everything had changed. Yet life has this way of placing small, almost invisible opportunities in front of you when you least expect it. It might be a casual conversation with someone you barely know, a chance invitation to an event you weren't planning to attend, or a new skill you pick up out of necessity that becomes a passion. One of the most surprising shifts for me was realizing that without the life I had before, I was suddenly free to explore paths I'd never considered. I no longer had to ask permission, compromise my dreams, or fit my choices into someone else's plans. I could say yes without hesitation and no without guilt. This freedom felt both intimidating and exhilarating. There were moments when I hesitated, unsure if I was ready, but each small yes opened a door to something I never would have experienced otherwise. I found myself trying new things I never thought I'd be good at or even interested in. Some of them didn't lead anywhere significant, but others changed everything. A casual hobby turned into a side business. A networking event I almost skipped introduced me to people who later became close friends and collaborators. Even the simple act of traveling alone for the first time became a gateway to self-confidence I didn't know I was missing. What struck me most was how opportunities often come disguised as challenges. Learning to manage my own finances felt overwhelming at first, but it taught me a sense of independence and control I had never truly felt before. Moving to a smaller home felt like a loss, but it freed up my time, my energy, and my resources to focus on what really mattered. Even having to rebuild my daily routines became an opening for healthier, more fulfilling habits. The truth is, I wouldn't have sought out most of these opportunities if I hadn't gone through that loss. It's not that I didn't want growth or change before, I did. But comfort can be a powerful anchor, and when you're anchored, you don't drift far enough to see the other shore. Loss cuts the anchor loose. It pushes you into uncharted waters, and while it's terrifying at first, you soon realize how vast the horizon really is. I started to see life not as something that had been taken from me, but as something that was offering me a second chance. A chance to redefine what success meant to me. A chance to focus on relationships that were real and meaningful. A chance to design my days with purpose instead of habit. Looking back now, I understand that loss didn't just take something away. It cleared the space I needed for something better to arrive. It opened doors I didn't even know existed. And while I wouldn't have chosen the pain that came before, I am deeply grateful for the opportunities that came after. Sometimes the most valuable things in life are found in the spaces we never planned to explore. There's a certain kind of strength that doesn't roar, doesn't demand attention, and doesn't need to be announced to the world. It's the quiet kind, the kind you only notice when you've been pushed to a place where you have no choice but to rely on yourself. I didn't set out to be stronger. I simply found myself in a situation where there was no one else to lean on, no one else to make the decisions, and no one else to carry the weight. At first, that reality was overwhelming. It felt as if I had been dropped into the middle of a storm without a map, without shelter, and without a plan. But that's the thing about self-reliance. You don't realize you have it until you have to use it. The first steps were shaky. I questioned my ability to handle even the smallest challenges, paying bills, fixing things around the house, making big decisions about my future. These were tasks I had once shared or avoided altogether. Now they were mine alone, and slowly, almost without noticing, I started to figure things out. I made mistakes, of course, plenty of them, but each mistake taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. Determination, I learned, doesn't always feel like a burst of energy or a surge of motivation. More often, it feels like simply refusing to quit, even when the progress is painfully slow. Some days, determination meant waking up and doing what needed to be done, even when I didn't want to. Other days, it meant holding on to a vision of a better future, even when the present was exhausting. It's not glamorous, and it doesn't always look like much from the outside. But it's powerful, because each time you choose to keep going, you prove to yourself that you can. What surprised me most was how this quiet strength began to seep into other parts of my life. I started making decisions with more confidence. I trusted my own judgment. I didn't need constant validation, because I had learned that I could face challenges and come out the other side, even if it wasn't pretty. That self-reliance became a steady foundation, something I could return to no matter what life threw at me. It also changed how I saw success. Before, I thought success was about reaching a specific goal or acquiring certain things. Now, I see it as the ability to keep moving forward, even in uncertainty. It's the knowledge that you can adapt, problem solve, and endure no matter how unpredictable life becomes. That mindset doesn't just prepare you for the hard times, it allows you to truly appreciate the good ones. I found that determination isn't fueled only by the desire to achieve something big. Sometimes it's fueled by the simple refusal to let circumstances define you. It's about showing up for yourself every single day, even when no one else notices. It's about being your own anchor in the middle of a storm, steadying yourself until the waters calm. Looking back, I realized that some of my proudest moments weren't the loud victories or the obvious milestones. They were the quiet ones. The nights I solved a problem I thought was beyond me, the mornings I got out of bed when I wanted to give up, the decisions I made without second-guessing myself. Each one was a small act of self-reliance, a small spark of determination, and together they became a light bright enough to guide me forward. There is a deep kind of peace that comes from knowing you can stand on your own. It's not about shutting people out. It's about understanding that even if the people you count on disappear, you will still find a way. That is the kind of strength that carries you through the hardest seasons, and it's the kind of strength no one can take away from you. It's easy to believe that wealth is something that comes in predictable ways, through a promotion, a business deal, or an inheritance. But after going through a season of struggle, I learned that sometimes wealth shows up in the most unexpected forms, and often in ways that aren't just about money. In the hardest moments, I wasn't thinking about gain. I was simply trying to survive, to keep moving forward without falling apart. Yet, little by little, what began as survival started to turn into growth, and that growth opened doors I didn't even know existed. When everything changes, you're forced to look at the resources you have differently. I began using skills I'd always taken for granted, things I considered ordinary, only to find that other people valued them in ways I hadn't imagined. What I thought of as hobbies or side talents turned into opportunities to earn, to create, and to connect. It felt strange at first, making something out of what I'd once overlooked, but it was also empowering. The truth is, wealth after struggle often starts with the smallest steps. A single freelance project that leads to more clients, a skill shared online that begins to attract a following, a problem you solve for yourself that ends up being something other people are willing to pay for. These opportunities don't arrive with a grand announcement. They come quietly, often disguised as extra work or something you do just to help out. Before you know it, they begin to build into something bigger. What surprised me most was that struggle had sharpened my ability to recognize value. When you've had to stretch every resource, you see potential in places others overlook. You start to notice that wealth isn't always about having more, it's about making more out of what you already have. That shift in perspective is powerful, because once you see possibilities where others see limitations, you start to find them everywhere. And yes, sometimes the reward is financial. An idea turns into a product. A collaboration grows into a partnership. A small, uncertain start becomes a stable source of income, but the wealth that arrives after struggle isn't always counted in currency. It can be the freedom to choose how you spend your days. It can be the confidence that you can stand on your own. It can be the network of people you meet along the way, people who open doors you didn't even know were there. I think that's the most surprising part, how the hardships themselves can prepare you to handle the good things when they arrive. Without the struggle, I might not have had the patience to grow something slowly, the persistence to keep going after small wins, or the gratitude to recognize how valuable each gain really was. The challenges taught me to manage what I had wisely, so when more came along, I didn't waste it. In the end, I realized that wealth after struggle feels different than wealth that comes easily. It's deeper because you know the cost of it. It's richer because you see the layers of effort, resilience, and creativity that built it. And it's more meaningful because it's not just about what you've gained. It's about who you've become in the process. Sometimes the greatest fortune is not found in what you receive, but in what you've learned to create. Sadness has a way of narrowing your vision. In the beginning, all you can see is what you've lost, and all you can feel is the weight of it pressing down. It's as if the world keeps moving forward, but you've been left standing in place, watching life pass by from a distance. I remember feeling like I was drifting, without direction or purpose, unsure of how to take even the smallest step forward. The days blurred together, each one feeling heavy, and I wondered if the ache in my chest would ever truly fade. But here's the thing about sadness. It doesn't always stay the same. Over time, it shifts, it changes shape. At first, you try to avoid it, to distract yourself, to keep busy so you don't have to face it head on. Yet somewhere along the way, you realize that the only way out is through. So you start to sit with it. You let yourself feel it without rushing to push it away. That's when you begin to notice something unexpected. Buried within the sadness are quiet truths about yourself that you never paid attention to before. I began asking myself questions I had avoided for years. What do I actually want in life? What makes me feel alive? What do I believe in when everything else has been stripped away? At first, the answers didn't come easily. Sometimes they didn't come at all. But each time I asked, I learned something, maybe not the whole truth, but a piece of it. And with each piece, I started to understand myself in ways I never had before. Self-discovery isn't a sudden revelation. It's more like uncovering a painting that's been covered with dust for years. You brush away a little at a time, and with each sweep, the colors underneath start to show. For me, this meant realizing that some of the things I thought I loved were simply habits, and that some of the dreams I'd set aside were worth chasing again. It meant acknowledging that parts of my life had been shaped by other people's expectations, and deciding I no longer wanted to live by them. One of the most surprising parts of this journey was how much strength I found in solitude. What had once felt like loneliness began to feel like space to think, to heal, to explore without anyone else's influence. I started trying new things not because I had to, but because I wanted to see what fit and what didn't. Some experiments failed. Others lit something inside me I hadn't felt in years. The sadness never completely disappeared, but it softened. It became less of a weight and more of a teacher. I realized that pain can be a mirror showing you the parts of yourself you've ignored, and it can also be a compass pointing you toward the life you're meant to create. I began to see my experiences not as a story of loss, but as a story of transformation. By the time I reached a place where I could breathe deeply again, I was no longer the same person who had stood frozen at the beginning. I had grown more certain of my values, more honest about my desires, and more willing to follow my own path. The journey from sadness to self-discovery wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. Sometimes you have to lose the version of yourself you once knew to become the one you were always meant to be. Change has a way of arriving uninvited. It doesn't always knock politely or give you time to prepare. It just steps in, rearranges everything, and leaves you standing there wondering what just happened. In those first moments, it can feel like your world has been thrown into chaos, as if the life you knew has been erased in an instant. I remember thinking, this isn't how it was supposed to go. But life rarely follows the exact script we imagine for it, and sometimes the chapters we never planned turn out to be the most important ones. At first, I resisted. I wanted things to go back to the way they were. I clung to routines, to familiar places, to old ideas of what my future should look like. But the harder I tried to hold on, the more I realized that change was not something I could stop. It was something I had to move through. And in moving through it, I began to see that it wasn't only an ending. It was also a beginning. The thing about a new chapter is that you rarely recognize it at the start. It begins quietly, almost invisibly, with small shifts you don't think much about. Maybe you start meeting different people. Maybe you try something you've never done before. Maybe you let go of something you thought you couldn't live without. These moments seem small, but they start to add up, and before you know it, you're living a life you wouldn't have imagined before the change. I began to notice that change was not just taking things away, it was making space for something new. In losing certain roles, I gained the freedom to explore others. In letting go of old dreams, I found the courage to dream differently. And in stepping into unfamiliar territory, I discovered abilities I didn't know I had. Of course, there were moments of fear. Stepping into a new chapter often means walking into uncertainty, and uncertainty can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff without knowing what's below. But I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to keep going even when you don't have all the answers. Each step I took into the unknown brought me closer to possibilities I couldn't see from where I started. There's something liberating about realizing you don't have to keep living the same story just because it's familiar. Change allowed me to reimagine what my life could look like. It gave me permission to break patterns that no longer served me and to write the next pages on my own terms. I stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and started asking, "What can I do with this now?" That shift in perspective turned what felt like loss into an opening. Looking back, I can see how the very things I once feared most were the catalysts for growth. If life had stayed the same, I might never have discovered the paths I walk today. I might never have met the people who now matter most to me, or learned the lessons that have shaped who I've become. Change didn't just alter my circumstances, it transformed me. A new chapter of life doesn't always announce itself with excitement or joy. Sometimes it starts with uncertainty, discomfort, and even heartbreak. But as the days pass and the pieces start to come together, you realize that you're not simply moving forward. You're becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more in tune with what truly matters. Sometimes the ending you fear most is just the beginning of the story you were meant to live. Through loss, change, and resilience, I discovered that every ending carries the seed of a new beginning. The journey shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid to create life on my own terms. And now I step forward knowing that the best chapters are still waiting to be written.